one of the other things I'm going to do here is just look at the history. So if I look at the history, there's a stack coming up here. What I don't want to do is change any of the history underneath at the bottom of the stack, but at the top of the stack I can change a few things here. So I can change the thickness, which is how much the faces extrude out, so 0.005. Make minor little tweaks and changes to this, 0.05. The local translate, so I can bring that out to say 0.1, that'll push that out. I can change the number of divisions as well to, let's say, 5, so it'll create 5 divisions in between each one of those. So I can change the history of this by just clicking on the extrude face history in the stack and make little changes to that if there's something I decide to change much later. The only thing with this is if I change one of the earlier histories, I'm going to cause some problems. So let's say I create a thickness of 0. or minus 0.05, which seems to be okay. Let me see what else I can do just to ruin what I've been working on. 0 there, and I'm going to create a thickness of minus 0.06. See what's happening here, it's not a big problem, but I'm changing an earlier extrude, and what that's going to do is if I have other things that I've done to the object based on the faces that I extruded earlier on in modeling this, it may cause some unpredictable results. So although I can change the history here, I have to be careful that I understand exactly what it is I'm changing. For this initial extrude face, I think, let's have a look. For this initial extrude face, I think it was this one here, it was just affecting the faces on the top. So that wasn't a really big deal. So I can probably go -1, and that's okay because I didn't have any extra faces based on the faces that I'd created here. But if I extrude the faces on which I based these, if I change the history of the extrude on which these new faces have been created, it's going to cause unpredictable results. So if I go -1, it's going to cause some really weird stuff to happen. So I just have to bear in mind how I've built my model depending on how I want to use it. But certainly in terms of adding divisions and things, you might want to create something like I may want to create a long cylinder that it's extruded along a curve or something like that. I might want to add divisions to it then, and that's when it comes really useful. So I'm just going to try that now. I'm just going to create an EP curve. Let's have a look. I'm just going to create a curve here, and I'm going to create a cube. What I get is an extrude, which is an extrude along a curve because I selected the curve and I selected the face and pressed extrude. But it's gone from there to the end of the curve because that's the start of the curve there and that's the end of the curve. And it's only gone straight from there to there. The reason it's done that is because I've only got one division that I've created. So actually if I go to the history, this is where the history becomes really useful, and I go into divisions and I change the divisions to 100, it will create 100 divisions from the start of the curve to the end. So this is where you can use the history to good effect by extruding along a curve and then deciding how many faces and how many divisions you want along the curve to make it look as good as possible. So that's quite a handy thing to do. So that's when I do use the history, when I use Extrude. I can also taper things by going into taper. So there again, that can be really, really useful. And I think I can twist as well. Yeah, so I can twist along that curve as well. So that's where those can be really, really useful. So using the history is useful. I've only got one extrude in the history there. So I understand exactly how I'm using it. If I had multiple extrudes and I decided to extrude one of the early extrudes, it could start getting really complicated. But in this instance, using extrude and changing the history has been very useful, and it's really handy, certainly for creating organic objects and such like.